Hello and welcome back. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Kwoba, and I'm here today with Sherry Swiney. She has a bachelor's degree in business and worked as a construction engineer and contracts manager on major construction engineer across the USA for over 30 years. Sherry was plagued by dark entities, but was able to eliminate them from her life without taking any toxic drugs or with the help of psychiatrists. And this will be actually our talk today, how she did that. And without further ado, Sherry Swiney, welcome to Night Flight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sherry, you had a very interesting experience during your childhood, but you weren't aware of that all the time. Could you elaborate a little bit what was going on there?
Yeah, I had no memory of my first 13 years of life until I was in my 30s, and so it's a complicated story. I'll try to straighten it out some. I used to joke as a kid, as a teenager, that I didn't have any memory of the first 13 years of my life. I'd get some sideways looks on that because the kids couldn't believe it, and neither could my mother. But so it was kind of as if life began when I first, after I was released from the Catholic orphanage, which I entered at age 7 and stayed there until I was 13. And so, you know, I got married and I had 3 children, and then we got divorced, and it was a real ugly divorce. And so the process of that was that their father actually took my children from me through the courts. He had married again, and his wife kind of had the judge in her back pocket. Well, that order stunned me to the point of where I remembered all of a sudden, the memories just flooded in like a tsunami. And so it really, really took me by surprise. And what I remembered was really not good. It was pretty awful. It was about my father, who apparently was enamored by the Japanese torture methods. This was after World War II, and so he was really enamored by the Japanese torture methods, and he studied them all the time. And so I ended up being a test subject in his experiments to see how that worked. And so, you know, he wanted to see how much a person could take before folding. And this started with me at about the age of 3, so there really wasn't much to unfold. And so the details of the torture methods were pretty gruesome, even as a 3-year-old. And so I remember the first incident was him preheating an oven and trying to put me in it. And so my mother yanked me away from that. So she saved my life there. And so, and then there was there was some animal mutilation that he made me watch. And as I screamed screaming at him to stop, he would just tell me to sit and be quiet and watch, or I would be next. And so that, you know, I had no choice. And so I didn't dare leave because I thought he'd come after me and do the same to me that he was doing to the small animals. And so he also did the thing of he'd have me stand in the kitchen with my arms spread out to my side and then my palms up, and he'd put a glass of water in each hand and make me stand there and hold the water without spilling a drop. And, you know, after a few minutes, for anybody, no matter what age, that's going to get mighty heavy. And so, you know, I would cry and scream and so on like that and tell him that my arms were hurting. And he'd just stand there with his clipboard taking notes and telling me that the experiment was almost over. And I remember other experiments of burning my hands with a soldering iron and telling me not to make a sound, or the soldering iron would be burning me other places and so on like that. Needles under the fingernails and all of that. And what when I remembered all of this, all of a sudden, it was, you know, it was too much to be true. And I was really, really shocked. So anyway, it's been suggested by other people that perhaps he was part of a mind control group and carrying out orders, but I have no idea about that, and I can't confirm it and wouldn't know how. So at about the age of 6, I was removed from his house, and I was taken to a juvenile detention center. And that was because the social workers said there was no room at the orphanage for 6 months. So I had to hold up at the juvenile detention center for a while. And I got into trouble there and got in a fight with a 12-year-old girl. And she blamed it on me. And so I got thrown into solitary confinement for 2 weeks. And it was, you know, I was just 6. And so I was scared out of my mind. I thought I was going to die. You know, I mean, I remember that vividly. And I remember there was a window up on the wall, and I was too short to see out of the window. So I had to climb up on climb the rungs to get up on this hospital bed. It was because it was so high up off the floor. And then tiptoe at the end of the bed where the pillow is and lean over to try to see out the window. And I could barely see over the windowsill. So, you know, I figured I was never going to get out of there. And so, you know, that left me pretty traumatized. And anyway, so I finally was transferred to the orphanage, and it had beautiful grounds and trees and flowers everywhere to the entrance. And I really thought I was in heaven. And this was a Catholic orphanage, and it was run by the Daughters of Charity. And they're the ones with the flying nun hats. I don't know if you know what they are. Yeah. And so, you know, you'd see them walking down their hall, and their wings would be flapping, and their rosary beads would be swishing back and forth and making noise. And so you got to know their footsteps and who was who, because most of the nuns were very cruel to the girls. There were 500 girls there from ages 0 to 18. And so I was released out of there at age 13. And so that, you know, that's, without knowing it, I was brainwashed as a little child. I was conditioned in the orphanage, and so I had no idea that life was any different. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So you were never able to determine what was wrong with your father, if all of that was just his doing, or if he was connected to some, yeah, let's say some weird military experiment. Because actually I find that very strange for a father to do that to his own daughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I do too. He was a very sick man. So in the end, when I did find this out, I went through the shock of knowing that this happened, of course, but I never had any hatred for him. I had already not remembered it for long enough, I think, that and he'd already passed away. And so I didn't have any hatred for him. I just wondered why would he do something like that? So I really don't know the why behind it.
And I think that goes for both the orphanage and or your father, because we know that one of, yeah, let's say milder forms of mind control is to tell somebody you know what, you are broken, you are bad, you need to be fixed, join our cult.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, in the orphanage, we had to go to church every single day.
Mhm.
And so the girls that were not of school age, they were taken care of separately. But even when we were of age to go to school, we still had to go to church every single day. And so what they taught us was that, you know, if you're not a good girl, you're in trouble with God. And so we're the hands of God, and so we'll do the punishing. And their punishing was really, really torturous. It was more than just the normal disciplinary type of thing. You know, they would, one of the things that they liked to do is if a girl was misbehaving, they would take the girl and put her in the center of a circle and make all the other girls circle around the misbehaving girl. And then the nun would take a wooden paddle, and the girl had to pull her pants down and bend over. And then the nun would smack her real hard with the wooden paddle. And as long as the girl didn't move, she wouldn't get so many. But it hurt so bad, you couldn't help but move. So every time you moved, you got it worse. And I got it one time to where the nun drew blood, and she just kept on going. She was like she was in a frenzy. Until I fell on the ground, and then that was that. And she just walked away. And then I had two girlfriends there that came to me after that and wondered if I was still alive. So, you know, I mean, it was, I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was a pretty miserable life. There were some good times there that I remembered, not many, but a couple of them. And, you know, where we went to a summer camp, and I remember playing hide and seek, and I found an apricot tree. And I climbed up in the tree, and I was picking apricots. And no, excuse me, yeah, not apricot tree, apple tree. And so I was picking apples, and they were still green, but they were so delicious. And so I stuffed my pockets full of them and took them back home to the orphanage and stuck them in my toy locker so I could sneak in there now and again and have a bite of apple. So that was a good time, a good memory for me.
Okay, so apart from being beaten, what other methods were offered to you to fix you? Because you're such a bad girl.
Yeah. So when I was one of the few girls of the 500 girls who actually had parents. The rest of them were actual orphanage and orphans. And so one of the favorite things that they liked to do to me was say that, you know, since I misbehaved, I can't see my parents during the next visit time. And so, you know, my mother would come and visit me every couple of weeks, and they wouldn't let my father come and see me at all. And I wanted to see him so badly because I didn't, you know, I didn't have any fear of him. I didn't have any hatred of him. It was very, very kind of weird. I guess, I think I was, I don't know what was going on in my mind. You know, after everything he had done to me, I still wanted to see him. And so I maybe there's a clinical name for that. I don't know. Anyway, so that was one of the things that they liked to do, is tell me I couldn't see my parents. And
but this memory of what your father did to you, was that always there, or was it gone, like wiped from your mind for a while?
It was wiped from my mind until I was in my 30s.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, and that was when I had the shock of my children being taken away. And it was a very ugly custody battle. And so when the judge called out his order in court, I completely fell apart, and I had to be escorted out of the courtroom. So yeah, and so going through that shock just jarred my brain, I guess, and the memories just came flowing in at that time, at that point.
Okay. What was the reason why did the judge rule that way?
Oh, well, you know, they had 5 guys get up on the stand, 5 guys I'd never met, get up on the stand and say that I had sexual relations with them, and I never laid my eyes on them until they came to court. I tried to say that in court, and of course I wasn't believed.
Okay.
So back in that day, when you were not faithful to your husband, that was grounds for divorce. And apparently it was, and because he had remarried and had a so-called stable home, and I hadn't remarried, then that made his home more stable than mine. Yeah. So I really don't want to get into the details of that because he's still living, and so are my children, and so I really don't want to.
No, I understand that. I was just, you know, how is it that you convince a judge? But I get the picture.
Yeah. So it was very unfair, and I fought for like 10 years afterwards to try to set things right. And all I ran into was lawyers that wanted to have their way with me and not do anything to help me. And yeah, it was a pretty bad time. And I don't know, in looking back, if some of that was my own conditioning that created that or not, because I know now the power of the word and the power of intent and the power of emotions that can create your own world. So that's a possibility. I don't know that that's true, but it's a possibility that I can't ignore.
So what was the first time when you realized you had, yeah, let's say, dark voices, dark thoughts? Where is that located on a timeline?
Let me see. That would be, see, when I got out of the orphanage, I was 13, and I studied a bunch of different religions, and I realized that, you know, none of them were for me. And so, see, I didn't really remember anything. I did hear voices while I was in the orphanage, and I would not go through with what they were telling me to do. And so I thought those were my father's thoughts because the voices were like what he would do. And so I didn't follow through with them, and I ignored them. And there were all the kinds of things that were self-doubt type of things, like, you know, no one's ever going to love you because you're a piece of garbage and a waste of flesh, and you know, you're worthless and you'll never succeed, and so stop trying. So, you know, that kind of thing. And so I pretty much ignored those things, or tried to, but I think they were in my subconscious. The recording that we do, everybody does this, where the subconscious runs about 95% of one's life. And that's all information that's given to you by others. It didn't come from you. And so that's a conditioning. That's a programming. I think of it as a programming. So there was that. But when I first realized that that these were entities that were not my thoughts, and I knew they were not my thoughts from being a child. And so when I when I got older, I wanted to know, you know, what these things were and what was going on with me. I didn't understand any of that. And so I did a lot of research, and I read every kind of book I could find on the brain. And, you know, none of those things answered my questions. So I finally, I guess it was through work when I became a computer programmer that I realized that the brain kind of works like a computer. And so I had the theory that if I could write a code to reprogram my brain, similar to when I write a code for a software program, then maybe I could reprogram my own brain. And so I went to work on that. It took a really long time. And, you know, it was really, really complicated, but to try to do that, to even try to think of doing that. And so I decided I needed something simple to remember while in the throes of having all these negative thoughts bombarding me all the time. And so what I had come to realize was that everything that those thoughts are telling me that's negative about myself are lies. And so I thought, what if I start using a different pathway in my brain and do something different than follow or even consider that those things are true? And so I ended up, when I'd have a negative thought, I would say that's a lie. And then I would go on to try to do something else. And I hypothesized that if I did that long enough and stopped using that other part of my brain, that it would atrophy and I would no longer be able to use it. So that worked. It took a long time. It took about, maybe about 10 years for me to get it right and to work it right. And now that it works right, people are using it and they're having amazing results like almost right away. So I had to work out the kinks, you know, by trial and error first with my own brain. And when I found the way that it works and I used it consistently over the years, it works like a charm. So I still use that method whenever I have negative thoughts about myself, which hardly ever happens at all anymore. But yeah, they will come back and test the waters from time to time. I think they always will. So we just have to be alert of our own thinking and know our own selves enough to be able to do that.
I think one interesting aspect is that these entities never say anything uplifting. It's always destructive. And I'm wondering right now, was there a point in your life where you had the feeling, maybe I'm slipping into something that kind of might get out of control, and that you had fears that you can no longer function in your normal day-to-day life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have had those moments, and in fact, until I got a handle on it, there were times when I would hear the thoughts of, you know, you're walking on a fence line, and you know, it would be so much easier if you would just let yourself go insane, and you know, then everybody will take care of you. You won't have to worry about anything. And I just I couldn't allow myself to do that, and I just decided that no, I don't need that. I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to continue staying on the other side, on this side of sanity, and not let myself go. I think that's where a person needs to be when they get to that point, because it's a pretty desperate point. You know, a lot of people will just give up and commit suicide. And I remember in my younger years, I now and again had some suicidal thoughts, but I just couldn't do it. I just, it wasn't that I was afraid. It was like, no, I've got to see what happens, so yeah, I didn't want to end it, even though the thoughts came into my mind. I had to remember that they weren't my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the trigger for that was to say that's a lie. That worked really well for me, and it's working for other people too now.
Yeah, I read your article. It's a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I will link that in the description box. I think that is very helpful, very useful. And you sent me another comment on that article.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it really it makes me feel wonderful that other people are using that and having success with it.
Yeah, yeah. How was it that you never considered going to a psychiatrist and they tell you, yeah, you are having a chemical imbalance?
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't know about the chemical imbalance story that they gave, but I did intuitively know that if I did go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, that I would be, and I told them what was going on with me, I would be labeled insane and given a whole bunch of drugs, and then I would be drugged senseless and I would not be me anymore. And I didn't want to risk that. So I thought, okay, I'm on my own here. There's nobody I can talk to about this that would want to listen or without thinking I was completely crazy. I really had a fear of what other people thought back in those days. And that was something I needed to get over.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, with the psychiatrists, it's not only that they have a certain attitude towards you, but they can really make your life miserable, even more miserable.
Oh, absolutely. They can put a label on you, and that label sticks with you for the rest of your life. And whether it's true or not, once you're labeled by a psychiatrist, you're sunk. That's you from now on. These psychiatrists do not think that that this type of thing can be cured. They think the only thing to do is to tranquilize, and that's not true. I'm living proof of it. Some of Jerry Marzinsky's patients are living proof of it, and they have he deals with people who suffer from schizophrenia, and so and the difference between, I think the difference between schizophrenia and what I experienced is that I didn't let the voices get control of me to where I had no control over my own self. And I think that's probably the definition. You'd have to ask Jerry for sure, but yeah. But see, the thing is, these entities attack everybody on the planet. And some people are extremely affected, and others are just kind of, no big deal. Just, I don't know where that thought came from, but, let me just carry on with my day. But everybody has negative thoughts from time to time, and I'm convinced that all negative thoughts about yourself and even about other people are coming from outside of you. They don't belong to you, because we're not naturally negative people. We don't have negative souls. And so I'm quite sure that that's where all negative thoughts about yourself and others come from.
Yeah, but that is certainly something that religion and other institutions would like to believe you.
Oh.
That you are a broken person, you need to be fixed, and you better stick to our rules, and we show you the way out, and usually then comes a savior in and what have you. Yeah,
they're experts at taking your power away from you. They want you to look outside of yourself for a savior, when in fact, even the Bible says the kingdom of heaven is within you. Come on, it's within you. And that's what that means. And so even for people who follow the Bible religiously, they need to look at that kind of information. The kingdom of heaven is within you. It's not outside and somebody can save you. You have to save yourself, and you do that by knowing you, knowing the real you, not the negative you that you hear in your negative thoughts, because those are not your thoughts. See?
Have you any idea why some people, I agree that it happens to all of us, that we get really weird thoughts, and then if we are aware and we are watchful, then we can see, okay, here comes a thought that is definitely has nothing to do with me. But do you have any idea why some people are affected so heavily and others, they just can brush it off?
Well, I'm not sure, but I think it has to do with if a person is pretty well broken at an early age, abused or sexually molested or betrayed, or something that is a shock to the human psyche, that leaves a door open for the entities to enter. And so, you know, everybody has traumas in their childhood. They fall down and they break a bone, or they have a concussion or something like that. But not everybody has hatred surrounding their lives. You know, kids can be mean as can be at times, but and that's one thing, but it's not enough to shatter an individual when the individual has a healthy home life. If the individual doesn't have a healthy home life and they live in a totally dysfunctional family, well, they begin to break open, their psyche begins to break open, and then they're vulnerable to insults and teasing and stuff like that. So they begin to hear the thoughts that say, well, you know, you deserved it, and what they're telling you is true, you're no good, and all these horrible things to lower the self-esteem even further. And if that keeps up and the child doesn't get some kind of idea that none of that's true, they could very well become victim to the entities in a very serious way.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. That is, I guess, how MK Ultra programming works. You get completely shattered and then built up again in their image.
What program is that?
MK Ultra.
Oh yeah, the MK Ultra. They actually go so far as to split the mind. They do it through emotional trauma, and you know, similar to what my dad did with the making me watch him mutilate animals. You know?
And I also guess what he did to you.
Yeah. And so, you know, I mean, that if anything split my brain open to where I was, you know, completely vulnerable to these entities, that was it.
Yeah.
So my saving grace was, and I didn't mention this earlier, was that when the torture got so bad, it's so painful, I actually left my body spontaneously one time, and I was actually, I don't know what happened to my physical body at the time. I think it collapsed, but I left my body and I went to this beautiful forest place, and there was, this is going to sound like a dream, but I know that I was actually there. there was an Indian chief, all full headdress, who was riding on a paint horse, and he came riding and swooped me up on the back of his the saddle and rode away to safety. Well, that whole thing stuck with me the rest of my life because I didn't feel any pain. I felt safe. And so from that moment on, when the torture sessions would start, if the moment they became painful, I left my body. And I got to where I could do it on purpose. And I'd always go back to that same place. So then that was my place of refuge in my mind. I didn't even have to leave my body to then experience that place again. And so when something really bad would happen, like in the orphanage or something like that, I would try to find a quiet place and go to that place. And so, I don't know how that looked from the outside looking in, or looking at me, but I know that it was the best thing I could have done to avoid any more pain. So, yeah, I think children have invisible friends. They have invisible places. And so I kind of think that might be healthy.
Yeah. It's maybe an autopilot of the soul.
Ah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good possibility, I think.
Yeah, that it has this inbuilt autopilot when it comes to a point where it's really, really too much, that you have this capability of escaping.
Yeah. I think that's another testimony to how powerful our minds are. I mean, we're learning more and more in science today of, how powerful our minds are. And, there's even a meditation group that did an experiment where they actually lowered crime in Washington, D.C. by 23.3% for a week. And this was measured by the FBI. And this was from a group doing meditating for this period of time. That was in 1993. And so as soon as they stopped meditating, the crime rates went back up again. So that was testimony to it was this meditation group that they were meditating on peace. That's all they were meditating on, was on, they were feeling peace. They weren't saying, oh, let there be peace. They were experiencing peace within themselves. And that radiated out and affected the rest of the town. That's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, I heard about that experiment, and it's, to me, a testimony as well that we are so much more than we are being told.
Yeah, and I think that, okay, so back in the 1940s, there was a group of scientists that were, they were the Einstein group, and they came up with what they called, they were talking about quantum physics, and they came up with what they called the observer effect, to where the experiments were changed when they were observed. They couldn't be clean experiments. They didn't know how to deal with, how do you do an experiment and not look at it, not observe it. But they knew that if they did, the mere act of observing the experiment changed the experiment. So they kept this quiet in the public because what that meant was how powerful our minds are. And they didn't want the public to know that. So, so naturally they wouldn't tell anybody. They kept it close in their own circle. And this kind of information only came out maybe, 10 or 15 years ago to the public, to where not just an elite group of people knows it anymore. Hopefully everybody knows it by now, but you know, what do they do with it?
Yeah, that's the point. What kind of conclusions are they drawing?
Yeah, exactly. So they didn't get the straight story to begin with. So now they're gonna take it and you know, do whatever they do with it, and not always in a good way.
Mm.
You know, because our minds are powerful to the good, and they're also powerful to the bad.
So while you were still experiencing these voices and dark thoughts, were there times when they were more subtle or almost gone? And if so, what did these times have in common?
Yeah, let me think. Yeah, let me think. I think the thing that keeps coming to mind is that the thing that was in common was when I was concentrating on solving a problem. But see, because I'm into engineering and science, and so I'm very scientifically minded. And so, and I love math. And so when I would be concentrating on solving a problem, the negative thoughts or the voices didn't enter my mind. They were gone. I don't know if that's because my brain was too busy to notice them, or because I was actually using the 5% of consciousness that we all have. And so I kind of think that was it. I was using, when we're running on our subconscious, we're running at about 95% unconscious.
Mm.
That's all the programming and the conditioning we get as a child and then on up. So most of our lives are run by that unconscious state of mind. And so if we, and it takes work to live consciously. It really takes a lot of work, and that's, I wish it weren't so, but it takes concentrated effort. So when I'm trying to solve a problem, that's all I'm doing. I'm focusing on the problem. So I'm probably in my 5% of consciousness, and that's running my life at the moment. So the entities can't get in there. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
Okay, so in other words, if you were really focused on something,
Mm-hmm.
then they had a hard time entering.
Yeah, it doesn't mean they can't. It just they have a harder time.
Okay. So would you say that in general, we have a choice to believe our thoughts or not?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We can believe anything we want to believe, or we can reject them and laugh at them. But what we the problem I'm having with explaining this is that most of what we believe comes from that 95% unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that 95% unconscious comes from others. It doesn't come from us. It's, you know, it's what we learn as a child from our family and our society and our church and the kids around us and all of that good stuff. So if we believe that fervently, that didn't come from us. We didn't generate those thoughts. So what was the rest of your question?
No, you answered my question.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I think that, yeah, most of it is culturally, and our parents, the ministers, the teachers, everybody always knows what is best for us, except ourselves.
Yeah, and that's true. And as a young child, we don't know what's good for us because we're just growing up. But when we get older, we have to ask ourselves, you know, who are we? What do we like? What do we want? And then what are our beliefs? Is that something that I believe, or is that something that I was told to believe or taught to believe? And so a person needs to get to that point of doing that. And then once they, you know, explore the world around them and they find out what they do believe, and it may not be the same as what they were taught to believe, well, then they have that struggle. And so, yeah, you can believe any of your thoughts. It's just a matter of which thoughts are yours, and you got to make sure they're your thoughts.
Mm. You mentioned something there where you said you had a laugh. In general, did a sense of humor help you along with your struggle?
Yes, it did a lot. See, the thing is that these entities they kind of act like a broken record. They're pretty robot-like, so I'm not sure what they are. I mean, they're invisible, so far as we know. We can't detect them yet, although I think there's new technology coming that might be able to do that. Anyway, so they seem to be programmed themselves to say certain things according to the memory that they've latched into, because they latch into your memory. So when they continue repeating the same thing over and over and over again, and you've gotten over the last thing that they said, and then they come back and say it again, for me, I saw the humor in their attempts to make me believe what they were saying. It was kind of like, well, maybe if we say it enough, she'll change her mind and start believing us again or something. You know, I don't know. I don't really know. But I did see the humor in it, and I began to laugh at them, and then they disappeared. I thought, oh, great. This is another way to get rid of them.
Yeah, some people call them Archon, some call them demonic, whatever. I'm not so interested in the label, but one thing that I found out is that what they cannot stomach is real good humor.
Yeah, they can't stomach good humor. They can't stomach love, and they can't stomach being called out as liars. Hey, what liar can, right?
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
Well, exactly. And if you can see the humor in it, regardless of how much you're being hurt at the moment, if you can take just a moment to look at this and see the humor in these guys, and you laugh at them, they will go away. They'll come back, and they'll keep coming back until they know it's useless. And they try to sneak in when you're least expecting it. Of course, you're always least expecting it. And so I guess maybe they've got higher ups or captains or chiefs or something that are not programmed. I don't know. But I did encounter one. Actually, I saw it. I saw it, how it represented itself as dark smoke in a room, and it wasn't a fire. It was a cold smoke, and it was moving around sort of like a tornado moves, only it was in slow motion. And it was heading toward me, and I guess I ought to back up and tell you what prompted that to happen. But there was a group of us that were practicing Reiki healing, energy healing, and so we gathered from our respective places around the world on a particular day, and we were sending positive healing energy to a particular prison.
In prison?
A prison.
And
okay. So, yeah, at one time I was heading up a human rights organization. It was an international organization, and we were focusing on trying to get the prisons in America to be humane to their prisoners. I didn't care whether somebody was guilty or not. It was the inhumane treatment that they were going through that we were trying to change. So to do that, we thought, well, let's try something here. Let's try sending some Reiki energy to a particular prison and then see if we can find somebody inside who will report back to us to tell us how that's going. Do they notice any difference or anything like that? Is there less abuse, or are there less fights or less rapes, or, you know, that kind of thing. So this one night we were doing that and my electricity went out and there was this, and my computer went off, my phones went out, and there was this black smoke that started heading toward me. Well, I was pretty shaken up, and then, but I figured, okay, so this is one of those guys. I can't, you know, I have to just say this is a lie. And but the message that came through was, these prisons are mine. Well, of course they're theirs. They claimed them because they're full of negative energy, which these entities eat as food. That's their food.
Yeah, they can lose there all day long.
Yeah, and prisons are, you know, a warehouse of negative energy. So that's one of their main hangouts, and they just keep perpetuating it continuously in the prisons. So when I saw this black smoke coming toward me, it was saying things like, you don't have any control here, and I'm the one in charge, and these prisons are mine, that kind of thing. Mm. And I said back, no, you're the one with no power here.
Oh, great.
And it went away for just a moment, but then it came back. And I thought, okay, now what? Is it going to kill me or what? And so then it started saying the very same thing again. You're the one with no power here. Those prisons are mine. And it was saying it over and over again. And all of a sudden, I got this flash in my mind of a Monty Python skit. Mm. And I started laughing. Mm. I started laughing. I couldn't help myself. I just started laughing, and it vanished. And that was the end of that. My lights came back on, my computer came back on, and my phone was working again. So that's the scariest, eeriest thing that happened with seeing these things. So, and it's the only time I ever saw one.
Did you ever have an experience where they attacked you in your dream time, or you had the feeling that they are broadcasting into your head and make you believe that that is your dream?
Oh yeah, that still happens to me. It also happens to Jerry, I find out, and I think this is happening because we're exposing them worldwide, and we're helping people learn how to get rid of them. You know, they don't want that, so they can't attack us physically anymore that I know of. And but now they're trying to attack us in our dreams. They're doing threats. They're one time, this was, I think it was last year, I was telling Jerry, I had a dream where there was this voice in the dream was telling me I had cancer. And I said, I don't have cancer. Of course I don't have cancer. And so, well, you need to go get that looked into. And I woke up and I thought, okay, that had to be one of the dark side entities coming in to try to scare me into believing that I had something that I don't have, because the power of belief can create disease. Yeah. And so I think that's what they were trying to do. And I told Jerry about that, and he said that he had listened to an interview with, I can't think of his name right now, Jason, I don't remember his last, Jason Pratt, I think, or don't remember his last name, had the very same kind of dream that he was talking about in the interview, and I had not seen that interview. So here's what they're doing. They're trying to scare us in our dreams, so when we wake up, we're frightened about, oh my God, I have this disease. And if the person thinks about it long enough or goes and gets it checked, of course they'll probably have the disease. So, actually Jerry wrote a short story and we posted it on the internet. And it's about this woman who tells Jerry about, she saw these dark black toads coming out of the physician's mouth as the physician was leaning over a patient that was on a gurney. And those black toads were coming out of the physician's mouth and glomming onto the patient and making the patient sick. This was one of his patients that saw this. So maybe she saw it and maybe she imagined it, but I think she saw it. And they weren't aware that she saw it because she went through all kinds of misery just trying to get the story out to Jerry. They were trying to prevent her the whole way from telling the story. So I kind of think that she actually saw something. So yeah, these doctors, even the medical doctors, I know they mean well, but when they tell a patient the worst case scenario, especially if it's a shock, the shock makes the situation worse.
You have 6 months.
Yeah, so then guess what? You have 6 months. If you believe it. Those that don't believe it and go off their way and do something else to make themselves better, well, they have a much better rate of survival.
Yeah. I had a wonderful interview with Sonia Barrett exactly about this subject. How, and she mentioned many cases, how people who were perfectly fine talked themselves into believing that I will have cancer at one point, and they did.
Yeah, that's so tragic. What's coming out in the public now, but I don't think it's wide enough spread yet, is that we used to think of DNA as a death sentence. If my parents had cancer, then I'm going to have cancer and my kids are going to have cancer because it's in the genes.
Yeah, that is what they want you to believe.
Yeah, that's not true. And what we now know scientifically, biologically, if anybody doubts me, go check out Bruce Lipton online and read all of his books and listen to all of his lectures, and you'll know for sure that where we used to think DNA was a read-only file in terms of computers, that we now know it's a read-write file. You can read it, you can write to it, you can change your own DNA, and you do it through your emotions. Because your emotions are connected to the field that surrounds you. It's I guess you could think of it as your aura, but it's beyond that. It's the ether around you. They're coming back with that word now in science. So it's what they call the field. Some call it the field, and that mirrors back what you send it. So if you send it doubtful, negative emotions, that's going to come right back to you. And those receptors in the cells that are around the DNA, I'm not a biologist, so I may not be explaining this with proper terms, but those receptors receive that negative input that you send out to the field that bounce back to you. Well, you can do the reverse. You can do the good and the bad. So you can talk yourself into being sick and you can talk yourself into being well. It's not an overnight thing for most people, and that's the rub. We're so used to getting pharmaceutical drugs that have an immediate effect, even though they might kill you in the long run. They have an instant effect. Within 30 minutes or something, you feel something. When you're doing things naturally, it takes a while. It takes a while for the reprogramming to begin and to get going. And it's like a cell growing. A baby doesn't grow overnight. So and that's nature. And so that's one of the things that people need to start kind of getting used to, that if they want to do something naturally, it's going to take a little time. If they want to do it pharmaceutically, well, they'll have some kind of result in a little while, in 30 minutes or an hour or a day or something like that. And if they continue with that, they'll probably have a malfunction somewhere else in their body and have to take more drugs to compensate for that. So anyway, it's a instant gratification society that we're living in today. And so few people have the patience to wait for nature to do her thing. Our bodies are intelligent. They're designed to heal anything. We just have to step out of the way and let it do it.
Yeah, and provide the right conditions.
Yeah, the right environment, because it's the environment, which is the field around us, that actually affects our DNA. You put something in a healthy environment, it's going to be healthy. You put it in a sick or depraved environment, it's going to get sick. That's what these entities are counting on. They don't want us to know this stuff. They absolutely don't want us to know it, so they do everything they can to hide it, to cover it up, to obscure it, to call it quackery or whatever works. They don't care what it's called. It's just whatever makes you not believe it.
So we have touched on how we can talk ourselves into really, really hideous situations, bad diseases. But we can also do the other thing. And that is where you mentioned learning computer programming. That has helped you, correct?
Yeah, and so that was how after I learned computer programming, and kind of made the connection between, well, our brains are sort of like computers. They kind of operate in the same way, in that they can be programmed. And so that's when I thought I'd try reprogramming my own brain. And so, yeah, that helped me. That was the key thing that helped me so much get out of that mess. That's what I used after I got through with all of my trial and error. That's what I used to write the That's a Lie program.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, whenever you felt attacked by these entities, by negative thoughts, you found a way to override that.
Yeah, and the way that I did it was to say, that's a lie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a short, sweet saying, because what I was trying to get to was I needed to come up with something easy to remember while I'm in the midst of being bombarded with negative thoughts, because that's a really hard thing to do. Mm-hmm. You're in the middle of feeling terrible about yourself or rerunning this program that was awful in your life, and you're back there living it all over again. You're in the midst of that world again. You're reliving that moment again. And it's hard to remember, wait a minute, that's a lie. Even that is hard to remember, but that was a short phrase that I came up with, and I was able to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in that situation, you cannot use a convoluted and long ritual. You have to have something that's cutting through, fast, effective, and furious.
Exactly, and that's what I found, and that's now today what other people are finding too, that they use the "that's a lie," and when something negative comes up, or they find themselves reliving a situation they hated, and they remember to say that more easily than they remember some long prayer, or they can go to praying right after they say that because they've snapped out of it. They can do whatever they would normally want to do in the long version of it, but they need to snap out of the trance first. And I found that using "that's a lie," whether I meant it or not, it was enough to snap me out of the trance.
Can you recall the moment when it worked for the first time?
Yeah, I remember it very well. Yeah, I call it my leap of faith moment. And it was back in the 90s, I think. So I was well up there in years. I was in my late 40s by then. And let's see if I can explain it. I had just come back from my martial arts class one evening, and I had been concentrating on how much I was affected by what other people thought about me. I still hadn't gotten over that part. I was still kind of other directed, and I wanted to get over that completely. I wanted to not care what other people thought. And I realized that, okay, so all I have to do is not care what other people thought about me and then move on. But I didn't know how to do that. And so I got home from class, and I was thinking about it very intensely. And then I decided, okay, well, okay, I'm not going to care about what other people think. I'm just going to, from this moment on, I'm just going to live my life according to who I am, and the heck with what other people think of me. And right away, I heard this screaming in my head, "You can't do that, we'll die." I'm like, you know what? I don't care if you die. I don't even care if I die. I'm doing this. So I'm standing in my living room, and I close my eyes, and I imagined this abyss with no board to walk on. And I was doing there's some movie that had that scene in it. And so I took a step forward into the abyss. You know, I had my eyes closed, and I was imagining that I was doing this. So I was doing this symbolically, just to kind of let my body feel what that felt like. And I took a step, and I landed on solid ground. Of course, I knew I was on solid ground anyway, but it was the whole idea of going through that. And that was my leap of faith. And so I got to the other end, and I didn't die. I didn't physically die. I didn't mentally die. And the voices were absolutely quiet. And I thought, oh, are you gone? Oh, wonderful, you know. So, they came back, and I remember one time saying, okay, so we didn't die, and you didn't die, so it's actually pretty nice over here, right? And there was no response at all. I think they were actually gone. And that's, from that moment on, I didn't care what other people thought about me. I just wanted to be me and do the kinds of things that I like to do, and think the thoughts that I wanted to think. And my main thing is now to show others how I did this, show others who are kind of in the same experience that I was in, or having the same problems I'm having with it. Maybe they have obsessive, impulsive, negative thoughts that they just don't know how to get rid of, but they'd like to. I would urge anybody who's going through that, who's tried everything they can, or that they've found, to go over to my page and read the "That's a Lie" program, and just try it. You have to stick with it, because like I said, it's not an overnight fix. But it has worked for an awful lot of people, so it's worth a shot. And it doesn't cost anything. It just costs some of your time. And stubbornness.
But yeah, we are not conditioned to think that we can be in control.
I know. Isn't that amazing? When I first read about that we have control of our own minds, I put the book down and I said, oh, I didn't know that. You know, I really had no idea that I had control over my own mind.
Yeah.
I had never even thought of that concept. It was a brand new concept, and it opened up my world. I know that sounds silly, but when you've been completely ruled by these big people, these adults, so you don't have any choice. You can't fight them, right? You got to just do what they say, and let them beat you and let them do all this stuff to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean,
but
not like you can run and get help, because the help that you get, the help that I got, was the Catholic orphanage. Well, that was just putting me into the fire from the frying pan.
Another thing, I had, starting from a very early age, I would say like 3 years old, I had a strong feeling everything is wrong here.
Oh,
I
yeah.
also had the feeling that I was not meant to be here, that I took a wrong exit or something. And I think you had that as well. You figured out pretty early on that the adults, they act as if they have figured it out, this game that we call life, but they don't.
No, and it's not their fault, because they got the same treatment when they came into this world. My parents, who also didn't know. Don't forget, this has been going on for thousands of years. We've been duped as a human race for thousands and thousands of years. And so this is the era that more people are realizing that. There's always been people on the planet that realized it, but there have been such a small number of people. And what I'm seeing today is that there are an awful lot more people opening up their eyes, opening up their minds, and saying, oh, well, what if everything I thought I knew is a lie? And, all you got to do is ask yourself that question and then look around. Hang on to something, because you might be shocked. It's a real shock for people to realize that, unless they've been heading into it slowly. But if you just have been bouncing around the world thinking everything is fine and everything you're looking at is true and everything you're hearing is true, and all of a sudden you stop and say, well, I wonder if that's a lie, you better hang on to something, because you're going to be totally pissed off when you realize that that is true. From the moment you came into this world, you've been lied to. And so everything you've learned has been a lie. Now your ABCs are not a lie, and your arithmetic's not a lie, and that kind of basic knowledge is not a lie, at least as far as we know. But, they're learning new things in physics these days. Science is a cult for the most part. And scientism, yes. And many of the scientists they're not willing to step out of the box, because they won't get funded for it. So they lose their integrity and they stay in the box. And so that's out of fear. And you don't think those entities are in there feeding that? Of course they are.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
In hindsight, we have already established it will take a while. It is not a one shot and you're fixed. In hindsight, what would you say? How long did it take to have results that were not only temporary?
Well, for me, it took me about 10 years to overcome the intrusive thoughts to where I knew they were permanently gone and permanently controllable. So they still will try to show up, but I already know better. And so it doesn't mean I'm running around with rose-colored glasses. I see the world for the way it is. But what I'm talking about is how I see myself and how I see others. I see through their shells of pretend world. I see that in their core, they have a soul that is most powerful. They have a mind that is most powerful. They just don't know it yet. And so I try to speak to that individual, that entity that I'm looking at through the wall that they've built around them. It doesn't always work, but that's what I try to do. So yeah, it isn't taking other people 10 years. It took me 10 years because I was starting from scratch.
Yeah.
But it's a lifelong thing. It becomes a way of life. And what happens is, if you use the That's a Lie program, every moment of every day for however long it takes, and then you do it over and over and over again, finally it becomes an automatic thing. So you don't have to think about it anymore. It just is. It's your way of life now. You know who you are. You know that any negative thoughts about you that would ordinarily lower your self-esteem or make you unsure of yourself or make you nervous and that type of thing, you know that that's not true. You just automatically know that that's not true because you have the experience of it not being true. When you get to that point, it's an automatic. I think what happens is your mind is actually finally rewired to think that way. So you don't have to remind yourself anymore.
Do you get feedback from other people that let you know how long it took them to at least get a grip on the situation?
Well, I've had reports that it was almost instant, like a day. They start it, and then right away the voices are gone, and then they come back and they do it again, and then they come back. I don't know. Well, I'm not sure about the length of time that these people have reported, but they report that, geez, I tried this and it worked right away. It was so fantastic. I just couldn't believe my eyes or my ears. And so they just kept it up. Now, I don't know when they got to the point of being permanently resolved. So I'm thinking that depends on the individual and how severely affected they've been.
Yeah, but still, I mean, a couple of days, so that's a good result.
Oh, it is. It's an excellent result. The first time I read that, and I've read it from several different people now. And the first time I read it, I thought, okay, I don't know if this person is pulling my chain or not. It would be wonderful if it were true. And then here comes another one from somebody else saying the same thing in different words. And then passing the information around, posting it on their websites. They're so thrilled about it that finally I'm free. And here's what happened. Here's how it worked. It's so simple and so straightforward and so easy. They couldn't believe it. And so, however many of their friends are doing it, I have no idea. But it's like a word of mouth kind of thing that goes on, and hopefully it's helping a lot of people.
But I think that is usually a good way to discern truth from nonsense.
Oh, absolutely.
It's always simple. It's not it can be a long story, yes, but at the end of the day, it's not convoluted. You do not need 10 specialists and experts. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And so I know some, here's an example. There are people that like to make themselves feel important. So they try to make things complicated. And in fact, the answer is pretty simple in many cases. There are some complicated things in life, but there's a guy who was an electrical engineer. And I'm not electrically minded at all. I'm civil and structural, right? So I asked him a question, and he went on to these diagrams and all this ins and outs and these really complicated words, and I had no idea what he was talking about. So then I went to somebody else and I asked him the same question. They said, oh yeah, it's real simple. It's from, you connect A to B and then C, and then you connect it back to A, and then you're done. I'm like, oh, that sounds really great. So I understood exactly what he was saying, and then I could get into the terminologies later on. There are terminologies that would fit with the That's a Lie program and how that works. But it's like you get into a vehicle to drive the vehicle, you don't need to know all the mechanisms and all the pieces and parts and how they all work and everything. You just need to know how to drive the thing and drive it safely. So that's kind of what the That's a Lie program is doing. It's just letting you drive your own vehicle at your own pace with your own force. And there are medical and scientific reasons why this works, but I don't need to go into that. I can say that the synapses in the brain only are used when you use them. And so if you don't use the ones that have been firing in the negative direction anymore, and you use a different path in your brain, a different set of synapses, then that's the one that's going to take over. Those are the ones that are going to keep firing. And pretty soon, that's your new program.
Yeah, that's also how you can break bad habits.
Exactly.
Mm.
So it's a repetitive thing. You have to repeat it over and over and over again. It works while you're doing it, though. You don't have to wait until you're reprogrammed. You can start now. And that's the beauty of this. You can just start it now and see how it works, if it works for you. And if it does, keep it up. If it doesn't, keep it up, and it will. Yeah.
Have you experienced attacks, not necessarily by these entities for doing this, but maybe from other people that came across your work and went ballistic?
No, not really. I'm not a doctor. I don't have, I'm not like Jerry, who has a license that could be jeopardized. But I'm just an experiencer, a person who experienced this, and I haven't been attacked at all. I've actually been thanked. So, but I'm sure that there are people, I do get asked questions, and I answer to the best of my ability. And so I have not been attacked by people. I've only been attacked by the entities. So for doing this, they're attacking me for doing this. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they're trying to, and to no avail.
Yeah, sometimes they can use people to do that,
Yeah, I know that.
Maybe that is in the works, who knows?
Yeah, thanks.
They just need the right idiot for it.
Right. Well, hopefully I'll see it coming and I won't get, slapped around too badly.
No, I don't think so. After what you have been through, I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's my thoughts exactly. So now Jerry and I are putting a small book together, which we're in the final stages of editing now. He's just writing the conclusion and, polishing up the introduction. We've got the inside pretty much done. So I'm hoping that we can get that published in the next month or two. And then when that goes out, I kind of think we've got some academic people who are interested, and they hopefully will publish on their sites. And when that happens, if it happens, I'm sure that we will be attacked, especially Jerry. Academically, it makes no difference to the work that we're actually doing. It's just their opinion. So, it's their narrow opinions from no experience whatsoever that they'll attack us. Now, there are psychiatrists who already are understanding that there's something else going on besides the physical. There's something non-physical going on with these people that are suffering. So we're not totally alone. We're just kind of among the soon to be published. Let's hope.
Yeah, I mean, they are familiar with what they call placebo effect.
Mm-hmm.
So they should know that there is something else going on.
Yeah, but I think they kind of look at the placebo effect a little differently, because that is in the mind.
Mm.
See, that is the placebo effect is in the mind, and the mind is very, very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So the mind can heal if it believes that it's taken something that will heal, and the mind can make one sick if one believes that one is getting sick. But this is different, because this is from the outside attacking. It's not in. It attacks the mind and the emotions, but it's not in the mind.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but the fact alone that they call it placebo effect, according to their understanding, that should not even happen.
Yeah, true, because they have no understanding of how powerful our minds are.
Mm.
But some doctors do, Bruce Lipton does, and a handful of others are beginning to learn more and more about how powerful we are. The scientists have known it since the 40s, and they just have been trying to keep it suppressed from the public. Because heaven help us if we have an educated public that actually knows how powerful they are. Wow, there goes the control mechanism right away.
Yeah, we can't have that.
That's very true. So
here goes our slave system.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the entities they're in everything on this planet, in every human being on this planet, and they like to feast on all kinds of trauma, but not just individuals. They do it on a mass scale, through terror attacks and warlike activities, and the deep state stuff that's being created by the deep state, the so-called deep state, and the prisons. And so they're manipulating this world into slavery. And we need to wake up to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And realize that, we're the powerful ones. The people are the powerful ones individually. You can't make somebody else be powerful. You can only be powerful on your own. And then once you realize that you can practice it in small ways by being compassionate and by being loving toward other people and yourself, that is tremendously powerful.
Yeah, and I think also towards other sentient beings, because what's going on in the slaughterhouses.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, talk about negative energy. Those poor critters they have a miserable life from the moment they're born. They're tortured throughout their lives, and then they're traumatically murdered. And then we eat that energy in our bodies.
I don't.
I don't either.
Yeah, congratulations. Yeah. And I don't know what we are thinking. That type of frequency that is pumped from those factory farming, slaughterhouses, what have you, that is constantly pumped into the atmosphere. What that frequency alone is doing, I really do not understand what we are thinking.
Well, we, meaning the people who are doing this, are thinking about profits. They have no mentality about human life in general. Life in general. These creatures are living beings. They have a consciousness. They have feelings. They may not have the same kind of feelings we do, or the same consciousness that we do, but they have it nonetheless. They communicate. They know how to communicate with each other. They know how to communicate to a degree with us. I mean, even plants and trees communicate with us. They certainly communicate with each other throughout the forest underneath the ground in their root system. And there's a definite communication going on. There's even some scientific studies. This is a little off track, but there's scientific studies like that are seeing, you know, just how much consciousness do plants have. It's really interesting. And they had this one experiment where there was a guy in another room, and he thought about how, okay, so for the next experiment, I think what I'm going to do is light a match under the leaf of one of the plants, of this plant, and see if it has a reaction. So when he walked up to it, he didn't even light the match, and the leaf tried to move away. So he wondered, did that leaf pick up the frequency of my thought or something like that to know that it was about to be damaged? You know, so that tells me that I don't know how it works, and I certainly don't understand the language, but they understand, they have senses to react to danger.
And sometimes I also think that these entities that like to attack us with negative thoughts, with all kinds of things, they certainly think that we, let's say, are lesser beings, you know? They like to think that they are in charge, that as you said, this is my prison. I'm the boss here. And so maybe the way we treat so-called lesser beings is our silent consent to be treated like that.
Oh, that's an excellent point. It's a really, really good point. And here's another point too, is Carlos Castaneda books, one of them talks about how the archons gave us their mind. Well, if they think they gave us their mind, then they're automatically going to think that they're the superior being, right? And they own us. Well, I beg to differ. I mean, maybe they thought they gave us their minds, and maybe they do give us their minds until we wake up to it and then break away from it. I don't know. But it's understandable that they would think they are the guys in charge over everything. That's how the ancient Greeks thought of it, the ancient people thought of it, and the Gnostics wrote about that the archons are the, I think archon means lord of or something like that.
Yeah, ruler. Mm.
Ruler.
Mm.
Yeah, so they claim that they made us what we are today, and they gave us their minds. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, time to kick them out.
Yeah, really, time to wake up to that that lie and become human, become the human beings that we actually are, that we were meant to be.
Mm.
And what we were meant to be is sovereign beings in whatever flavor is unique to each individual.
Mm.
And the whole idea of ruling over another person just doesn't come into the picture.
Yeah. So, Sherry, do you have any final ideas, thoughts, encouragements for us?
Well, I would encourage everybody who is experiencing negative thoughts of any kind, of any severity, to have a look within themselves and realize that anything negative they think about themselves is a lie. It's being fed to them. It's with thoughts that don't belong to them. That's what I would encourage people to do. And I would also encourage people to talk about this. It's so far been kind of a silent, personal suffering that we go through. I don't think that's necessary. It doesn't mean air your dirty laundry out in public. It just means if you have somebody that you can talk to, or if you know somebody who's suffering, give them some information on what they can do about it without taking toxic drugs that'll screw them up badly.
Yeah, which can even make it worse.
It can, unfortunately, yeah, it really can. Some of those drugs that Jerry talks about, the antipsychotic drugs, did you know that they are giving them to children now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the most criminal thing I've ever heard of,
Yeah.
you know?
Got to catch them early.
Well, you know, I first wanted to blame the parents, but then I think we have Edward Bernays to thank for all of this manipulation of the mind, and he's known as the father of propaganda.
Yeah.
And he was actually Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he knew how to manipulate the minds of the masses. He was using sex and fear and profit. So, yeah, so now I can't really blame the mothers other than I wish they would educate themselves and not fall for the propaganda. They're killing their children.
Yeah, and that is, I think, a task for all of us on every level, to do our homework and to finally make better decisions.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree. Judith, I'm so glad you invited me on, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope your audience did too.
Yeah, we will see. We will get some comments, and I certainly enjoyed it a lot. And it's really encouraging to hear this story. Somebody who did overcome these attacks without any psychiatrist and toxic drugs and what have you, because I have a strong feeling that the overall belief is that that is not possible.
Yeah, I think you're right. So if anybody has any questions, they can use my contact page on my website and write me a note, and they can browse around the website. There's a link there to Jerry's Facebook page, and we started a group for people who are hearing voices so they can talk to each other about their experiences. And it's a private group, and so they can talk to each other, and it seems to be working quite well. People are, you know, they have someone they can talk to that without getting laughed at.
Mm.
So, and there's some good ideas getting thrown around in there. So, yeah, people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everything will be linked below in the description box, as usual.
Okay.
I sometimes have the feeling people still don't know what the description box is for.
Yeah, I agree. All the show notes.
Okay, thank you so much for coming, Sherry. This was a wonderful talk. I enjoyed it very much. At some point, you should come back, definitely.
I would love to.
And yeah, guys, that was it. That was Night Flight for today. And we see you next time. Have a good time. Have a good week. Take care of yourselves and bye-bye.